Are there any classic video game fans out there? Well, you might be the only ones that know about Rampage the game. To the rest of you, this is another epic movie by The Rock. This is 2018's Rampage. Spoiler alert, while I might be giving you my opinion on the film, that's no substitute for watching it for yourself. Links to the film are in the description. As we get a glimpse inside Athena 1, the space station, we see that the crew is dealing with a loose test subject, and the only crew that's left is one lone survivor. She's trying to get to safety, but she finds out from mission control that they won't even give her that option until she contains the subject. Seeing that this is her only option, the astronaut heads for the lab where the test subject got loose in the first place. She retrieves 3 of the samples before the alarm sounds for hull integrity. Suddenly, we see what she's running from. What used to be a rat is now some sort of mutated monster. She barely makes it to the escape pod in time to jettison back to Earth. Just when she thinks she's safe, she notices that the glass is shattering and soon the entire pod explodes from the pressure leak. This is pretty on par for a Rock movie nowadays. Essentially, we're about to see The Rock and King Kong together. Did you see that giant porcupine rat? I wouldn't want to tangle with it. The Rock can have that. When we get back to Earth, we meet Davis as he leads some other scientists on an expedition, and we get to see the gorillas at the San Diego Wildlife Sanctuary. Davis has them observe the gorillas, but then he heads up to them to see how the new gorilla responds to his commands. The gorillas that have been there respect and listen to him, and for an instant, the new gorilla seems to be taking things in pretty well. Suddenly, a white gorilla emerges from the trees and the situation starts to get a little tense. When one of the scientists ignores Davis's orders, the white gorilla jumps in and saves him. Little did the guy know that the white gorilla is best friends with Davis and his name is George. George has a better sense of humor than most people I know. I can already tell that this sense of camaraderie that George and Davis have is gonna pull at my heartstrings at some point in time. After Davis reiterates the sense of family he should have with the new member, we see Davis getting ready to leave the sanctuary. Just before he leaves, Kerry stops him to flirt, and she couldn't make her intentions any more obvious. Davis tells her that he has other plans though, and he leaves Nelson dumbfounded at the fact that he just turned down someone like Kerry. I'm a little dumbfounded too. She's a good old Jane Goodall, and she's ready to think like an ape. What plans could he possibly have that are more important? It turns out that he just wants to go home to spend time with his dog. Little does he realize that pieces of the escape pod are falling from the sky, and the 3 canisters fall in 3 different wildlife areas. One in the Everglades where an alligator eats it, one in the desert where a wolf pack is living, and the third in George's habitat. In the morning, Davis goes back to the sanctuary and he finds out that something is different about George. When he goes to see George, he finds that George is way bigger and he killed a grizzly. George is scared of these changes and Davis isn't sure what to do. When Davis goes to the gorilla enclosure, Connor shows him the canister that leaked the substance. I'm sorry, if you find something mysterious that you think genetically modified a gorilla to be the size that George is, why would you ever think of picking it up? He's not even wearing gloves. That's a freezer Ziploc bag. Meanwhile, we find Claire and Brett, who are the owners of the company that was conducting the research, and they aren't too happy about losing their station. But Claire points out that the meteor showers that the news is talking about are actually the research canisters that made it to the escape pod. She readies an expert to retrieve them, and now we meet Burke. This guy has trouble written all over his face. They don't even know what they're retrieving yet, and they're already locked and loaded. I guess it's better to be safe than sorry. Back in LA, we meet Dr. Kate, who is woken up by a phone call that tells her that she's late for work for the 2nd time this week. When she sees the news speak about the meteor shower in George, she tells work that she's just not gonna make it, and she heads for the sanctuary. Burke radios back to Claire and Brett, and he shows her the damaged canister and the other dead wolves around. Meanwhile, Davis looks at George's results and it shows that he has lethal amounts of growth hormones. Davis wants Nelson to keep quiet about things because once people find out, they'll want to put him down. I feel like it would be the complete opposite. He'd become a lab rat within seconds if the word got out. Soon, Kate shows up and Davis tries to get her to answer some questions. She tells him that she can't really tell him anything, but when she names off all of the symptoms, Davis brings her back to George's cage. Kate tells him that this is actually her research and she's the only one that can save him. George doesn't like waiting for his food though, and he breaks out of the facility. George runs straight out of the San Diego Zoo, and Davis manages to calm him down for a second. Then Homeland Security pops up in a helicopter and shoots George with who knows how many tranquilizers. This is not how you gain an animal's trust. If George didn't hate them before, he sure does now. At the same time, Burke and his men are hunting the mutated wolf, and they end up shooting it down from their helicopter. They hop out of the helicopter to verify the kill, and the siblings tap into the helmet cameras to watch the hunt. The men spot the tracks, and they start to question what they're hunting. Suddenly, the giant wolf pops up and starts taking them down. Eventually, Burke is the only one left, and he calls in the helicopter to shoot it down. This wolf leaps into the sky and plucks the helicopter out of the sky with its bare teeth. Burke actually thought he had a chance against this thing. I mean, a regular wolf would have been enough trouble. Now you've got a giant wolf that can bound across gorges and eat everything in its path. Just give up. Kate and Davis get taken in by DHS and they meet Agent Harvey. Needless to say, Davis's people skills are a little rusty. They load George up on the plane and Harvey goes over their files. He finds out that Davis was in the Army Special Forces and he tells him that it's his job to clean up messes like this. We also find out that Kate was actually fired by the company that she did the research for. I know it's no surprise to see Jeffrey Dean Morgan essentially play Negan in another movie, but that's pretty much what he is here. By the end of this conversation, you can also tell that he's just doing his job. He doesn't get any joy out of killing George, but he's gonna do whatever he has to finish the job. I can respect that in certain circumstances. Once Harvey leaves him alone, Kate tries to apologize for deceiving Davis, but all he cares about is whether she can cure George or not. When she says no, Davis seems to lose hope for George. Back at the research company, Brett shows Claire what happened with George, and he shows her that Kate is with them. Claire isn't sweating it though because she has a way to control the animals. She has a radio tower that transmits a frequency that brings the animals in, and she turns it on. The wolf and gator immediately head in that direction, and George wakes up out of his drug-induced coma. Once George breaks loose, Harvey and his men open fire on him, but that's not enough to stop him. Eventually, one of the guys shoots a box of explosives, and the plane starts to go down. Davis comes up with a plan to save himself, Kate, and Harvey, and they all float gently to the ground. When Harvey wakes up to find himself essentially free-falling, all I can imagine is that I would probably end up passing right back out if that was me. I would love to go skydiving, but I'd be worried that I'd pass out on the way down and never open my chute. Luckily for them, their chute's open, but they've got much bigger issues to worry about now. When they check the wreckage, they find out that George survived, and Brett and Claire know that now too. Just then, the FBI comes to the office with a warrant to search all of their files, and Claire tries to redirect them to focus on Kate and what she created. When we go back to the wreckage, we see that Kate is trying to defend herself to Davis, but he just assumes that she's just human. He tells her about how he found George, and his distrust for humans becomes clear. Kate in turn explains that her research was supposed to be used to cure illnesses, but Claire turned it into a weapon. Kate tried to destroy it, but Claire had her kicked out before she could finish the job. Soon choppers show up to take them to the base, and they find out that George is actually traveling with the wolf to the city. Now, I'm no primatologist or animal behaviorist, but I remember George tearing a grizzly bear to shreds because he was scared. And now he's working with a giant wolf. Something is definitely off here. Kate tells the colonel about the radio tower that Claire had built, and she assumes that that is why they are traveling together. It turns out that the FBI has contacted the colonel, and they tell him to apprehend Kate and Davis. As they're escorted outside, Davis ends up knocking out their soldier escorts, and they make their way to the medical helicopter since it isn't surrounded by guards. When they open the door, they get caught by Harvey. At first, it seems like Harvey is gonna stop them, but after hearing their pitch, he seems to have a change of heart as he throws Davis the keys. He throws him a phone to keep in touch, and Kate and Davis hop in the helicopter. When Harvey gets back in the control room, he watches as the colonel starts the operation. They fire at the animals, but of course that doesn't work. How have they not figured out that bullets and missiles just aren't cutting it? Heck, a nuke would probably just make them bigger. As Davis approaches the city, he gets a call from Harvey that lets him know that they're trying to evacuate the city, but he knows they won't get that done in time. Sure enough, George and the wolf are literally tearing the city like a giant playground with live fire toys. Oh, and just in case that wasn't enough, apparently Kate thought it was a good idea to throw porcupine DNA in there when she made the formula. The wolf can shoot spikes now because why not? This is just great. Suddenly, the Colonel gets news that there is something huge in the water making its way towards the city, too. Kate and Davis notice this too, and they get to see that Florida sent their own monster. This thing doesn't even flinch when it's shot by an RPG. Just stop shooting! You're causing more damage to the city and equipment than if they just left the animals alone. Kate and Davis rush to the research building, and the Colonel prepares even more bigger bomb on Chicago. Harvey can't stand for this though. He tells the Colonel to redirect his men to buy Davis some time, but he ends up getting commanded out of the control room. Davis and Kate make it into the research facility, but they find out that the FBI took all of the research out of the lab. Kate finds another way to access the files, but Claire notices that they are in the lab. Just as Kate finds the formula that stops the animal aggression, Claire and Brett show up and they make her hand over 2 of the tubes. They don't see that she snuck one into her pocket. When Davis refuses to come with them, Claire takes the gun and shoots Davis in the torso. I've gotta hand it to her, Claire has got balls and she's not messing around. If it was just Claire, I think she might actually have a shot at staying on top. Brett is a sniveling coward, but Claire has enough stones for the both of them. Just as Brett, Claire, and Kate make it to the helicopter, they see that George has made it to the top. Davis even shows up in the nick of time to save Kate from falling debris. They actually come up with a genius plan to get George the antidote. They put it in Claire's purse and feed her to him. It's perfect! Handle 2 problems with 1 bite. In one fell swoop, George snatches Claire up and devours her. Meanwhile, Harvey appears downstairs and he works a deal with Brett. If Brett gives him a laptop with all of the info, he'll let him go. After abiding, Brett runs outside and gets crushed by falling chunks of the building. Meanwhile, the gator is burrowing through the building as it climbs to the top. Kate tells Davis that it takes about 10 minutes for the antidote to kick in, but Davis isn't sure that they'll have that long. Just then, the wolf pops up on the roof, and they decide that taking a broken helicopter to the ground is a better option than staying on the roof. They strap in and get the helicopter started, and as the building starts to collapse, they crash land the helicopter and they're both fine. Apparently, the safest place in the world is on the same helicopter as The Rock. Haven't you seen San Andreas? When the world falls apart, I'm finding him and sticking to him like glue. For a second, they think that it's all over, but when the ground shakes, they're surprised to find that George is still alive. Davis tries to sign with him, and when George signs back, he knows that his buddy is back. No time for celebrating though. The alligator and wolf emerge from the debris, and George gets ready to fight. After sending Kate on her way to get help, Davis grabs some weapons and stands with George against the other 2. It's time for a smackdown! Remember that epic dinosaur fight in King Kong? This is that level of terror and destruction. Oh yeah, and the wolf actually flies! It has a built-in wingsuit like a flying squirrel. Obviously that one needs to go first now, so he leads it to the gator who eats its head. Thank goodness. That was about to be 10 times more terrifying than it should have been. Now they just have to deal with the 50-foot walking Florida tank dinosaur. Kate ends up finding Harvey and he calls the Colonel to call off the bomb strike. After the Colonel pulls up drone footage of George and Davis fighting together to stop the gator, he starts to question his actions. Meanwhile, Davis spots a weak spot behind the gills and he tosses a whole ring of grenades inside. When they blow up, the gator seems to lose itself for a second, but it comes back and tosses George onto a spike that pierces his chest. The gator comes over to George and continues to bite him and toss him around. And Davis looks around to find an attack helicopter just sitting around. Convenient, but I'm not gonna complain. After a heroic show of determination, strength, and family, George ends up finishing things by driving the same spike through the gator's head. George hobbles over to the middle of the street and he lies down in agony. After a touching moment where Davis tells George that he did it, George seems to breathe his last breath. Soon Harvey and Kate pull up and they look at George's body as civilians emerge from the buildings to seek emergency services. Just then, Davis notices George peeking at him, and after he flicks Davis off, the team can't believe that George still has the same sense of humor from the beginning. As all of them turn to help the remaining survivors, the credits roll. I can honestly say that I can't look at this as a fan of the games. I had never played them before, but as a movie freak, I can say that this was a great feel-good action movie. Give it a shot. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more like this one. Comment what you think I should watch next, and I'll see you in the next video.